Hello everybody. Good afternoon, or good morning, or good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. But whatever time of day it is, a very warm welcome to all of you to the second day of this series of events that we are running, which are focusing on spectrum, connectivity, and COVID-19. So we had two fantastic sessions yesterday at the event yesterday. First of all, hearing from Mario Manovitz on the way in which ITU procedures are being adapted to deal with the current situation. And we're very glad to hear from Mario that through a mixture of virtual meetings and other measures, plans for preparation of both CPU and WRC23 remain on schedule, which is great to hear. And then following on from that, we had an excellent panel which was focusing on keeping the world connected, and we had a number of policy and industry speakers who joined us and were telling us how the measures that they're taking to ensure that networks stay up and what they're doing to deal with the pressure that networks have been put under today. So we had a fantastic first day, and we're delighted to be back here again today. And today we're switching to look more at specifically spectrum issues. So we're going to be looking at the impact of the current situation on spectrum awards and valuations, and we have a fantastic panel who I'll be introducing you to in a second to discuss some of those issues. But first of all, just to mention a few things. First of all, for those of you who weren't able to join us yesterday, as I mentioned, there were some very interesting discussions. So the live recordings from those sessions are now available to download. So if you did want to catch up on those are available to download on the Forum Europe Twitter or YouTube accounts. And the links to those you can actually find in the reception area on the event platform that you're in today. And before I did move on to today, I just wanted to give a few details about the audience from yesterday, and in particular the number of people and where people were attending from, because when I'm sitting here on my own, as I am here, and presenting in front of my computer, it sometimes feels like I could be talking to myself. But I'm delighted and somewhat relieved to tell you that wasn't the case yesterday, which was great. So we had a look at the figures, and I think in total we had over 500 people participating in yesterday's session. I think there were almost 400 directly here on the main event platform. And then about 150 in addition were streaming live on Twitter and on YouTube. And I think in terms of where people were joining from, we had people from 63 different countries who were tuned in. And I want to give a particular mention to the two people, I'm not quite sure who you are, but there were two people who joined from Australia. And I think I tried to work out what time that would be, and I think it would have been about 2 in the morning by the time the event finished yesterday. So there's a real commitment to that. So thank you to you for joining us. And thank you to everyone for joining us. And we were delighted to have everyone with us, and it's great to have you all back in here with us today. So just before we started, and I passed over to our speakers for today, there are a couple of things I wanted to mention on the housekeeping side. So first of all, I wanted to say a big thank you to all of our sponsors and partners for the support of this event. You can see their logos have appeared now on the screen next to me, and we really do appreciate the support of each of you and what you have done to make this event possible. So thank you very much. And I also wanted to mention the hashtag for the event. So you can see the hashtag, which is at the top of the screen here, #SpectrumCovid. So anyone who wants to tweet about the event or to post anything on social media about the event, please do use that hashtag when you do so. And also everyone, you can obviously check in to see what other people are tweeting on using that same hashtag as well. So next on to the schedule for today. So as I mentioned before, we're moving on today to look specifically at more of a spectrum issue. Yesterday looked more broadly at connectivity. Today we're going to be looking more specifically at spectrum and in particular at the impact that COVID-19 is having on spectrum awards and valuations. So there's a number of important auctions and awards that are being planned or have been planned for the next few months. And our panel today are going to be looking at the impact of the current situation on these, the extent to which they may or may not be delayed, and how really the whole lockdown and everything going on is going to be affecting the award of spectrum. And then moving on to maybe valuation and looking at kind of the effect that the possible or the unpredictability that we have at the moment, the possible impact that might have on value of certain bands as well. So there's definitely lots to talk about, and as you can see, the schedule for today, the structure for today, follows a similar theme to those of you who were here yesterday would have seen for that one. So we're starting off with a panel on this main stage area, and then following that we have a more interactive session where the audience, you guys, the members of the audience, are able to bring your video feed live. And your audio feed live, and come and be part of the discussion to give your thoughts on the panel that you've heard and the discussions that you've heard. So that will take place in the sessions area, which you can navigate to on the left-hand menu bar on your screen. So you need to go into there at 4:15, that is European time. Obviously, you'll need to adjust that for your time zone. So for half an hour, you can join that session there, and it'll be a chance to kind of follow up on all the discussions that have happened in the panel. And then finally, for the final half an hour today, we're going to be opening the networking and the exhibition area, and that will give you a chance to connect with fellow attendees in the networking area and check out the exhibition stands that some of our sponsors and partners and others have live there. So plenty going on, and plenty of opportunity for you guys to get involved, as well as obviously to listening to the discussions that happen on the stage here. And just very quickly, as I'm talking about yourselves all getting involved, the other way that we'd like to invite all of you to really to pass on your thoughts to the panelists, and also to pass your comments and questions on the discussions that you're hearing, is to use the area on the right-hand side of your screen. So you have the chat function, the chat bar, and that's the place to use to post questions, to post any comments you have, and we will be feeding a few of those back to the moderator, back to Tim, who's going to be moderating the session, who will be passing those on to and asking those to the panelists. So please do post your questions and your comments in the chat area. In the poll area next to that, that's where we will have some live polls later on today, which will be running, and we'll be asking you to vote on some of the key issues that we're going to be looking at. So you will be notified by the moderator, by Tim, when those are live. So do look out for that as well. And finally, in the People tab on the right-hand side, that's where you're able to browse who else is attending the event. And also to send them private messages. So if you did want to have a look who else is here and to send those private messages, then you can do that using that People tab there. So please do get involved, and we really do want to hear from all of you and hear all your thoughts on the issues that we're covering. So I'm now delighted to get things kicked off properly, and to do that, I'd like to introduce Tim Miller from Plum Consulting. So I'd like to bring Tim up onto the platform as possible. Hi, Tim. So Tim is going to give us a short introduction on the issues, and to give an overview on those issues, and then introduce our panelists. So Tim, welcome, and over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. As Dan said, this is a very important and timely conference, and it's covering quite a small area of the whole telecoms issues that we're facing now. One of the things we heard a lot about yesterday was how we are going to be facing a large increased capacity, capacity demand for telecoms over the next couple of months. Although it might not be as large as is expected, because the timing and the positioning of the additional capacity is going to be different to the normal peaks. But there is going to be some increased need for capacity, and one of the things that operators always look to do at times like this is to see how they can leverage their spectrum holdings. I don't know if the slides are available, Dan. They're coming up now. Great. So what we want to talk today about is the way that spectrum is going to be changing, the way we use it, the way we value it, the way we might possibly award it in the future. One thing we have seen over the last couple of weeks is that a number of regulators have delayed auctions that are due to happen in the near future and even to the end of the year. They're postponing them, they're rethinking about how they're going to be awarded, they're possibly putting spectrum together into other packages. And some regulators, notably in the US and in France and in South Africa and Ghana, are the big ones that have made the news recently, have started to give away spectrum that they were going to award on a temporary basis, so that operators can make a temporary use of it. So the way that operators are using this spectrum is changing. The way that regulators are dealing with this is changing. And the immediate question that people are facing is, what is this going to do to the value of spectrum? How do operators value this spectrum in the short term and the medium term and the long term? We've had to think about this, and I put out a paper on the Plum website yesterday, which you can actually access if you go to our expo booth on this site as well, to think about how we may see changes in value over time. And the key answer to what's going to happen is that we just don't know. In the short term, there's going to be access to new spectrum in some countries, as I said, on a temporary basis. The issue is that in order to make use of this new spectrum, first of all, you need to have engineers able to place that onto the network. And secondly, there's a big issue in terms of how is this spectrum used using the technology that you have. There's been a big deal made of making 6 gigahertz available for Wi-Fi, but the number of Wi-Fi devices that can use 6 gigahertz is not that great. The other thing in the short term is that because telecoms companies, although not as affected as the rest of the economy, are suffering from uncertainty over employee availability, over finances and so on, then the value of spectrum is going to likely decrease because of the availability the ability to pay for it. Now that obviously is a short-term issue, which then goes into the medium term, because in the medium term, not only is there going to be uncertainty over financing, but also there's going to be just general economic uncertainty and difficulties. And while telecoms is proving to be a relatively robust industry, obviously due to the fact that lots of people are now more dependent on it, any decrease in personal and household income is going to impact on the ability to pay for services, which of course then feeds into difficulty on paying for spectrum. So the big question is what happens in the long term. Now in the long term, if operators have started to use this temporary spectrum and they understand better how it can be used in their networks, then you may find that there's an increased value because of greater certainty as to how it may be best used. Also, in the longer term, people are likely to understand the value of telecoms a lot more. The fact that they have been able to talk to their friends and families over the last few weeks, when otherwise they wouldn't have been able to do so, means they may have a higher willingness to pay for the services, which again will lead straight through to spectrum value. But because there is going to be a sudden glut of auctions coming at the end of the pandemic, where all the ones that are delayed now are going to happen at the same time and possibly be combined with other auctions. With many countries doing it at the same time, you may find that a lot of the multinational operators are going to suffer from a lack of funds, and therefore the value of spectrum is going to be significantly reduced. Can you go on to the next slide, please? So the big question that we have, other than what is the impact on value, is this going to change the fundamental way that companies deal with spectrum policy? And we think it probably will do, but again, how is not entirely sure at the moment. We are seeing that telecoms is being revealed as an essential service. It is along the lines of water and power, and access to broadband is is vital for all members of society. One of the things that we have talked about a lot over the last few years is that you have to think about social benefit as well as the economic benefit of spectrum. And that's particularly important now, but of course social benefit does not come into the award process if you're using a standard economic auction. So there's a question that comes up: are auctions the best way to award spectrum? Secondly, as I was mentioned earlier, demand and willingness to pay for telecoms, it's much higher at the moment. People sort of understand that it's very important they have a connection, but at the same time, there may be decreasing revenues due to the fact that people have a lower disposable income. There is a big danger that governments might see auctions as a way to recover some of the money they're currently pouring into the economy to try and overcome this crisis. And finally, we've talked about spectrum here as being something important from the kind of capacity point of view. That's not just capacity of mobile networks, it's also capacity of fixed wireless networks and also backhaul. Will the operators find that governments are starting to change the way that they prioritize telecom services in spectrum awards? So moving on to the panel, if I can move to the next slide, we have a series of experts to delight you with today, looking both at the looking at this issue from both the regulator side and operators and equipment vendors. You can see their names on the screen here: Luigi, Jan, Michelle, Nicholas, Nick, and Frank. We're not going to be doing that in that order. I'd first of all like to pass over to Michelle, who's going to talk to us from Beric's point of view. Michelle, are you available?
Yes, I am. So hello everybody, and thank you for inviting me for this interesting session about spectrum and connectivity in these COVID-19 pandemic times. I think it's an understatement to say that the networks have never been more important that during these times today, and you have seen the increasing use of fixed mobile networks and mobile apps in order to remain in operational and to remain in contact with family, friends, and colleagues as well. In several European countries, different kinds of measures has been taken from consumer protection to spectrum assignment as well. So for BEREC, since the outbreak of this crisis in mid-March, the first measure to take was to play the role as central pillar in order to collect and to exchange information between the different NRAs. The second action was the setup of a kind of special reporting mechanism in this area, and so in order to have a good monitoring of the increase of traffic during the first days and the first week of this crisis. And on 19th of March, together with the European Commission, there was a joint commitment in order to help operators to cope with this situation, with the increase of the traffic. And as last element, together with the European Commission too, we have asked large streaming services like Netflix and YouTube to reduce on a voluntary basis the quality of the video streaming. As a result, all those measures have led to this conclusion: no major problem, no congestion has been observed in Europe for the time being. But of course, there was another and a new hurdle we have observed related to this crisis, and that's about the 5G and COVID-19 pandemic. The spread of misinformation has been dramatically important in different countries, from UK, Ireland, Netherlands, Italy, Czech Republic, Sweden, Belgium as well. There was different cases of acts of vandalism, arson has been committed. And so that's the reason why for BEREC it was important to ask its member to give the right information at different levels: national levels, regional levels, and local level as well. So last element, and Tim already referred to, in different countries, regulators have indeed postponed the auction procedure. They have delayed the auction process, and other have give spectrum on temporary basis, or if they have amended the existing rights of use to help alleviate congestion. So in a way of conclusion these introductory remarks, I would say that the telecom sector has demonstrated that spectrum generates value in all dimensions. It is very important for us in BEREC to be very committed in order to ensure the continuity in this service, which is perfectly in line with our current strategy and in our forthcoming strategy to promote full connectivity. Thank you very much. Over to you, Tim.
Thank you, Michel. So I think that's a very useful overview from BEREC's point of view. We'll come back to questions for you at the end after everyone else has spoken, if that's okay. Can we bring Jan up, please? Jan, hi there. Jan, do you want to talk to us for 5 minutes? I'm afraid we can't hear you. So I think we're having a bit of difficulty with Jan's microphone. Shall we quickly move on instead to...
Sorry, it was mute. No.
Okay, fair. Okay, so
okay.
Can you...
Yes, I'm Frank from RSPG. And yes, I would like to give a short outline of what we're doing as RSPG and what is our current information on Spectrum Awards. You know that we dealt very early with 5G issues, and as well we are making our mind up how COVID-19 affects our daily work and as well our RSPG work. And we, as we have heard already, we made the experience that there is a new significance to connectivity of stable networks, and this is even obvious in these times where people use connectivity in their offices not only, but as well as schools, for home office and medical practices and gyms. So a precondition currently for well-functioning of society and economy are well-functioning fixed and mobile networks, and therefore we think it's important to have in particular mobile lines and mobile connectivity available. And as we know, spectrum is a main and scarce resource that we need for making mobile connectivity available. We have been early active as RSPG on 5G. You know that we identified the pioneer bands already in 2016. We came up with a 5G roadmap, how to allocate and how to assign 5G spectrum in particular. And as well in our new 2-year program, we have issues on board which are relevant, how to use 5G and spectrum, which includes spectrum sharing, additional spectrum, and how to combat climate change via spectrum policy. So it's one of the major pillars to make spectrum available, and the other is how to address, as we have already heard, public awareness and concern of health, and how to handle disinformation on COVID-19 and the spread of COVID-19 via 5G networks. So these are two issues we are working on. First of all, I would like to give an outline on awards. It's not only us, but as well the European Union who try to get and collected information on changes on spectrum awards. And the replies we got showed that a broad majority of member states doesn't see the need to shift auctions currently due to force majeure. And some member states of those who indicated possible postponements are eager to make 5G spectrum available in 2020. So that's the current state of play. I don't know whether it will stay valid, in the next months. Let's see. But there are as well some innovative countries who think about making spectrum available for a restricted period of time, additional spectrum in order to manage additional connectivity needs. And at the same time, we are as well looking at the EMF discussion, not only in conjunction, but as well in conjunction with COVID-19. You know that there are some concerns of EMF and health issues, and as well we are facing some disinformation on what COVID-19 brings with regards 5G brings with regard to COVID-19. And we will pick up this issue in a meeting which we are organizing together with Commission and BEREC later this year, probably in autumn. And there we will talk about the impacts of COVID-19 on several spectrum management, spectrum awards, and authorization of spectrum, and as well what are the impacts of COVID-19 on this, and how to tackle discussions on 5G and health issues, because we see the need to react on those issues and to communicate carefully and properly with people, and in order to react to those concerns and to give a high acceptance to the rollout of 5G networks. Thank you.
Thanks, Frank. I think it would be useful to talk to you after when we had the panel about the number of delays to auctions, and I understand that there are other regulators that are going ahead with auctions, but let's talk about that in the panel. In fact, I think Jan, you're going to be talking about the auction that is going ahead now, despite the pandemic. So I'll pass over to you now.
Okay. Hello and good afternoon, everyone. Yes, our 26 gigahertz auction project started October last year, together with the Ministry of Transport and Communications. In Finland, we do it together with the ministry, since the ministry issues so-called network licenses to operators based on the auction results. And we as a Traficom, we issue just radio licenses in addition to network licenses to operators. So our auction project started in October 2019. And the first thing is that we need to make all the regulations and laws updated, since we always make a different regulation for each auction. However, the auction regulations that is prepared by Traficom it's very similar to what we were using 2018 on 3.5 gigahertz auction. We also decided quite early stage that there will be a public consultation on these regulations and technical license conditions of the radio licenses. And this public consultation, it will last 1 month, and we decided that it will be beginning of February. Before that, the ministry ordered consultant service, and that service was used to define the starting price based on the existing auctions on 26 gigahertz frequency band. Well, there are not so many available so far, and so in addition to that, we also used our earlier auctions starting prices and defined based on those the starting price for the 800 megahertz block in 26 gigahertz band. The auction public consultation started February, and the most of the comments were received by the ministry based on these network licenses, and the Traficom get only about 10 statements to our radio licenses and auction regulations. After the public consultation, the ministry agreed our preliminary schedule, and it hasn't changed despite the COVID-19 and the remote working, which started in mid-March in Finland. And since then, all the Traficom and ministry people have been working remotely. Last week, the Finnish government issued an invitation to apply for electronic communications licenses for the purpose of providing telecommunication services within the 26 GHz spectrum. This registration is open until 20th of May, and the operators who are willing to participate, they will register to Traficom, since Traficom is running the auction, and the role of the ministry is just after the auction to issue these network licenses. As I mentioned, that we really need to define this auction schedule quite early stage, is that there are certain time steps how we can issue these regulations and when they need to be enforced before the auction invitation is open. And we get all the regulations ready on 15th of April, and we're able to start invitation to the auction in last week, 21st of April. Our current plan is to have this auction is 8th of June. It's Monday, and we believe that we can finalize the auction in that week. Then the minister, they can issue these network licenses on 18th of June. And these network licenses will be valid 1st of July, and they are valid until 21st of December 2033. And auction bidders are not known or publicly known after this invitation time, and we don't provide any results during the auction. Just after the auction, we provide results who are the winners and what is the winning prices for each of these 800 MHz frequency blocks. And we also decided that we will issue the lowest 850 MHz on this 26 GHz band for local and regional usages for the verticals, harbors, mines, airports, and things like that are planned to be used these regional licenses. So that's about the situation what we are doing now in Finland, and there is no delays on the auction plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. I've noticed there's a couple of questions that have come through already. Do feel free to start asking questions in the stream chat, and we will come to those after everyone's introduced themselves. We will move now on to Luigi from Qualcomm.
Hi.
Great, hi there.
Hi.
Can you give us an introduction, please?
Okay. Hi, hello everybody, and thank you for having me here today. And what I'm going to do today is I'm going to speak to you about Spectrum Awards and also about Qualcomm efforts to support in our chips that all the key 5G spectrum bands to enable, of course, our customers to launch the 5G devices as fast as possible and globally. So, but first, let me say, today mobile networks, we have said during this conference, are more important than ever, as people are working and studying from home and require connectivity. So, what is Spectrum Awards? Where are we in terms of Spectrum Awards today? And what do we expect to happen at Qualcomm in the next few months? Partly, we have heard from some member states today and yesterday. Finland have decided to move forward with the auction for the 26 GHz. Hungary have concluded in early April an auction for some of the key 5G bands, 700, 2.1, 3.5 GHz. Michel was saying about Belgium, where temporary licenses have been provided. So there are a number of countries which are actually moving forward with auctions, and we are very pleased with that. There are some other countries, like, for example, Spain or Austria, Poland. There are some rumors about the UK, France, which are actually, delaying the auctions. Now, given this is true, but let's also look at how big is going to be this delay. We don't expect this to be more than 3 to 6 months. And the other important piece of information which we need to add to this delay is that most of the countries which are delaying, they already had a first wave of auctions. So 5G is going to be in those countries anyway. What another trend which we have noticed, and it is apparent really in the last week, in countries like Germany and Netherlands, some of the mobile network operators have started to use existing spectrum resources to deploy 5G. This is the case of the 1800 megahertz in Netherlands, and also we have seen in Germany the 700 megahertz with a couple of operators launching those spectrum bands. Now, that said, there is a big risk. The risk is that the auction delay will make Europe to fall behind the other regions. Before the pandemic COVID-19, there were already there were these regions like US, China, or South Korea, which were ahead in deployment of 5G. So obviously the risk is that Europe will fall even more behind those regions. We have seen, just to name a few, in Japan, just last month, Docomo, KDDI, SoftBank, they launched 5G services in both the 3.5 gigahertz and the 28 gigahertz. But then we have seen the US, where in the low bands, as well as in millimeter wave bands, operators are launching. China is very active. South Korea is the same. So what's the key point here? The key point is that in other regions, there are very important, substantial 5G investment plans. And these are actually an important and critical component of actually strategies for recovery in Asia and North America. Where are we in Europe? In Europe, there has been a digital strategy released, which set up a 5-year roadmap, basically to ensure growth and flourish of the global economy. And this is important to be kept, and the target set is important actually to be achieved. And I must say that crucial to all this digital strategy for Europe in the next 5 years is really, connectivity, which can deliver basically the benefits for Europe and the growth which we need. So what's the key point? For us at Qualcomm, we believe that, first of all, we need to accelerate in Europe in the deployment of 5G networks. And this will enable post-COVID-19 European growth. Second, we should not allow to have spectrum awards to be delayed. Actually, we would welcome regulators to include in the planned and delayed spectrum awards to include additional bands like millimeter wave. This is an excellent opportunity to make the most out of the delay. And also, we would like also to think that leading economies like Germany or France would not delay their spectrum awards, or would do the maximum to catch up. Germany was planning to do millimeter wave spectrum award in 2020. France was halfway. So this is important to be kept. Now, let me finish by highlighting a little bit what Qualcomm is doing in order to make 5G available worldwide. We have recently announced our third generation Snapdragon platform. It is called X60. Actually, why this platform is important? First of all, it is a 5 nanometer platform, so it is very advanced. And it supports all kinds of 5G bands and combination, including millimeter wave, sub-6 gigahertz in TDD and in FTD. And also, this platform actually aims to provide the operators with the flexibility to maximize the spectrum resources available to them. So basically, with the smartphone using Snapdragon X60, what the operator can do is they can use a mix of frequency bands and spectrum types in various deployment modes, so the standalone and non-standalone. And actually, what we also enable them is to use what we call the dynamic spectrum sharing. So where operator can deploy the 5G services on using basically existing FTD bands already used for LTE, for example. This is critical in this time. So in terms of deployment, our chipsets really now are going everywhere in the world. We are seeing, still seeing very good growth of 5G, and we have seen basically more than 45 operators launching 5G worldwide, over 40 models of devices being launched, and over 340 mobile network operators investing in 5G. So it is really very fast moving, this market, and the fact that there is a very fast take up, and we expect this to remain the same. Finally, let me share a message on spectrum management. In Europe, we have always been at the forefront in spectrum management, thanks to the efforts of BEREC, RSPG, and all the regulatory bodies. And we should be staying ahead there. We should remove all the barriers that actually, don't allow spectrum to be brought to the market. And we should actually put even more spectrum in the market, both below 6 gigahertz and above 6 gigahertz. This is to have actually very advanced 5G connectivity. So my last words are really, now more than ever, Europe needs to stay connected. And thank you.
It's quite clear that you're not in favour of delaying auctions. Nick from Telefonica, Nick Blades, if you can join us now as well. It'd be good to hear from a operator's point of view as to what your feelings are.
Thanks very much, Tim, and thanks Dan and everyone at Forum Europe for arranging the conference. I think when we think about the timing of auctions, we have to, in the current circumstances, really think about whether they're on the critical path to the delivery of 5G, and stand back a little bit and think about what would we need to do to deploy 5G tomorrow. Firstly, the spectrum that's being auctioned needs to be available. There's no point in having an auction if the spectrum's not available. And secondly, you've got to be able to deploy it. And I would really question whether deploying new antenna equipment and new radios, base stations for new spectrum really complies with sort of the requirements of many of the COVID protocols around critical travel and activities, given that there are so few devices that would actually benefit from that 5G spectrum. So from our standpoint, we need to, looking at our countries, we had 2 auctions coming up in the near term, Spain and the UK, both 700 megahertz in particular, and both those countries also auctioning a second wave of 3 gigahertz spectrum. But I think a point Luigi raised, which is very valid, is that there are already spectrum in the market for 5G in those countries. Both Spain and the UK have highlighted publicly that they're going to have problems clearing the 700 band because it's not safe to get the engineers to travel and work. I wouldn't want to go up a very, very high TV antenna on my own, so I need to work with somebody, and that really cannot be accommodated in the current crisis. So both those countries have already highlighted that they're going to struggle to actually release the spectrum on time. And in those circumstances, we have to think very carefully about whether it's worth running an auction. Now, it was interesting to hear what Jan said about running the 26 gigahertz auction in Finland. A lot of those types of processes are not particularly data intensive, and I don't think are particularly complicated. But when you move on to these high value complex auctions with maybe a lot of different bands available, this starts to become quite a complicated process. So I'd like to echo something that Jeremy Godfrey from Comreg said yesterday, is that perhaps we should just think about letting the telecoms companies focus on delivering services to their customers today and not distract them overly from trying to run spectrums auctions at the same time, because given the amount of money involved, they are very distracting. Now, it is possible to run an auction remotely. Indeed, the regulators generally use the internet to disseminate the information. But if you don't take part in auctions regularly, you might not really understand what the bidders have to do. So bidders generally have to guarantee that they're not going to lose the data or share the data with anyone else. And to ensure we can make that guarantee, we tend to do 2 things. One is to have a secure and separate computing environment, so something that's not attached to the internet. So that's quite difficult to create over the internet. And remotely. We normally have to have it in one place. And secondly, we have to provide a lot of physical security for the auction team so that we can be sure that the data stays within the room. So, for example, your personal mobile phone and your personal laptop are not allowed in the bid room when we run our auctions. And in that way, we can guarantee that we haven't lost the data or the data hasn't gone anywhere it shouldn't do. Similarly, the auctioneer has the same constraints. They have to demonstrate to the bidders that the data has stayed safely within the auctioneer's domain, and consequently, they have similar issues. And at the end of the day, if you think about it, putting people in the same room is exactly the opposite of what we should be doing from a safety standpoint. And it is a serious point. It's not a trivial point at all. This is a health and safety problem for firms in that they have to comply with health and safety legislation, and there is a clear concern about putting people in the same room. I mean, if you think about it, you'd probably have to completely isolate the bid team, have them isolated in a hotel, have a 14-day quarantine period before they went into the room together to work. So it seems to me to be very, very difficult exercise, both for the regulator and for the bidders, if you're going to have one of these complex auctions that require quite a lot intensive effort from the operators. So while there must be lots of sort of economic and political objectives around getting this spectrum into the market, we have to bear in mind that in the two cases I've highlighted, the spectrum isn't actually going to be available because of COVID-19, and secondly, we can't actually deploy it because of COVID-19. And really, I don't think it's worth the countries taking the risk with what is effectively the lives of the staff of the regulators and the staff of the mobile operators and their families in the pursuit of arbitrary objectives about delivering 5G. Our focus at this time is providing services to our customers. Our second focus will be the maintenance of our network and deploying the existing spectrum that we have. And only then, when you start to think it's safe to do so, would we want to really be looking at new spectrum. Thank you very much, Tim.
Well, thanks, Nick. You mentioned about the bid teams, and of course the other big question about access to people during an auction like that is access to the board, because during an auction then you quite often have to take questions back to the board about bidding strategy, and them not sitting together may be something else to consider.
I think so. Well, Tim, that is something we could consider, but actually because we're a multinational, we tend to do that electronically or virtually anyway. It's more if you're working in a bid team and you're working with analysts, these sort of tools, these collaborative tools are okay, but they're not the same as two people sitting down with a piece of paper and scratching through a problem, having a chance conversation over lunch about something, a problem that's been concerning everybody. That doesn't really work very well in this type of environment. And given the amount of money at stake, we'd like to do it properly and professionally.
Absolutely. If I can ask for the rest of the panel to be brought up. We've had a few questions coming through already, and we'll move on to those in a moment. First of all, for anyone watching, there are a couple of polls that are being run alongside this panel. On the right-hand side of your screen, you'll find a link to them. Do feel free to vote when you can, and we may come onto those later. If not during this panel, then certainly in the Have Your Say session afterwards. I've got a couple of questions that I'd like to ask first of all, and probably this one is applicable to Luigi and Nick more than anyone else. We've seen a few regulators are starting to award spectrum on a temporary basis, and Luigi, you said about not delaying auctions and trying to get things done as quickly as possible. And I can understand that there are reasons why not, but it would be good if you could explain why it is that you think that this temporary licensing of spectrum during the pandemic is not going to be making up for the fact that auctions are delayed.
Well, Tim, we are not saying that regulators should not give temporary licenses. I mean, regulators, of course, can provide temporary licenses, and this has happened in Belgium, but wherever possible, the licenses, I mean, they should run for an auction and should give also certainty over the long term that the operators will have investments and they will recover the investments on launching some spectrum bands. Obviously, it depends case by case. What is the temporary license? What are the conditions attached? What are they going to do after with those temporary licenses? Can they keep them, or do they need to go for an auction? Can they lose the spectrum they will be using? So, I mean, the devil is really, in the detail in this case.
Nick, do you have anything to add to that?
I think what Jeremy said yesterday was that they had a request from an operator to issue a temporary license. And I think also in that case, you've got operators already present in the band or in the adjacent band. So certainly from our perspective, if there was spectrum in an adjacent band that was coming up for award and our equipment could be remotely tuned so that we could use that spectrum, especially if we're seeing traffic in outside of where we would normally have capacity problems, then I could see that being quite a useful additional tool for us to deal with the crisis. But at the end of the day, it's a temporary license, and as I said, deploying new equipment for new spectrum is not the priority at the moment. So if this equipment's in the field and you can tune it remotely to deal with it, then yes, anything, every little helps, I suppose.
That's very useful. I mean, what this actually relates to one of the questions that came in. It's coming from Vina Morat of GSMA. I've been asked to elucidate on my comments that the number of devices that can use 6 gigahertz is not that great. It's about basically consumer Wi-Fi devices. Consumer Wi-Fi devices generally at the moment don't have the 6 gigahertz capability, and so therefore the FCC releasing 6 gigahertz to enable people to use Wi-Fi more at home doesn't really work. It's more about the fixed wireless access operators. But again, whether or not they have the equipment on the consumer end to make use of it is another question. And that sort of fits in with what we were just saying about there not necessarily being the equipment. And Nick, as you said, we can't get engineers out onto sites to roll out new equipment to use this new spectrum if it's not already on existing networks. Jan, I had one question for you. Which is regarding the auction that you have. And obviously you're progressing along with the timetable that you've developed before. But I'm wondering if there are any logistical changes that you've had to make regarding, as Nick said, the conversations among bidding teams and the way that you're dealing with kind of data security and so on.
Well, none of the operators have raised these issues, so we think that they are preparing themselves. And some of the operators who used to participate in our auctions, they were already having the teams in different countries because, for example, Telia, they have a headquarters in Stockholm, and so part of the auction team is in Helsinki, so they are already doing remotely by themselves. And also now DNA. They are more or less owned by the Telenor, so they also have the same situation. So they need to have teams in different countries, and they are just need to sort it out themselves. The biggest issue was in the beginning of our auction approach that operators, they were saying that they need to have early enough the information when the auction is going to happen, so they can start preparations themselves. So, but no issues have raised so far on this. So.
Okay. We've had a question from Ricardo Tavares of Techpolis. He asked, related to something that you were saying, actually, Luigi, you said about there's a danger of Europe getting left behind. Ricardo's actually asking about within Europe, are we risking a two-speed Europe for 5G? Given that France hasn't released any of the bands yet, Italy's released 3.5 and 26 gigahertz, and some places have no plans for 26 gigahertz. Are we risking there can be being a fragmentation in the way that 5G is is being rolled out across Europe, and is that going to be made worse by delaying or even cancelling or the auction?
Well, Tim, I believe, okay, obviously France is a little bit late at the moment in making spectrum available, but they were already after week 2, as I said, during my speech. We believe that they will proceed very fast, and by the end of the year, they will also have the spectrum available, and they will run with 5G and possibly faster on other markets as well in Europe. Now, there is a danger in any case that in some of the countries there will be all the spectrum available, and they will do some very exciting things, the operators there. There will be some countries which will be left just with spectrum, which over the long run will penalize. I mean, the operators in terms of what they can do with it. We have seen, the example of Japan, Docomo, and the others are running services on all the spectrum bands available for 5G. This will give them some advantage. We expect this advantage in Europe will also be given to those countries and those operators so that will run faster with them. So that's what we think, and will be normal.
Does anyone else want to add to that? I'll take that as a no. There's a related question that's come in from Javier Dominguez from Telefonica, which says, if 5G can be deployed in other bands, is it really so critical to prevent the delays to the 700 megahertz auctions? I suspect there's a big question here about rural rollout and so on. I don't know if anyone wants to comment on that. I'll take it.
But maybe I can just say a few words on this, if maybe Frank can add something afterwards. I think it's a general question of capacity. You need more spectrum because there is a very big increase of traffic. So that's correct. That the existing rights of use most of the time are technological neutral. So meaning by that you can use the newest technologies, including 5G, in existing bands, but at the end of the day, there will be a lack of capacity, reason why you need more spectrum. This would be my answer. Over to you, Tim.
Okay, Frank, did you want to add to that?
But can you please repeat the question?
The question is about delays to the 700 megahertz auctions. If there are delays to those, should we be overly concerned about that, given that 5G can be launched on the 3.5 band?
I think there are only a few delays on 700 megahertz. So as I said, everybody tries to make available spectrum as early as possible. And yes, I don't want to discuss the situation of each and every member state, but there are those where 700 megahertz is not yet available. They have probably good reasons. And as you can see on our RSPG website, of course, the member states have different timing to make 700 megahertz available, and I think the most necessary issue is that there's enough spectrum in the market in order to provide the innovative services and to have the capacity to provide services. And therefore, of course, as mentioned already, you can you can use as well other spectrum which is available. But our aim in Europe is, of course, to make 700, 3.6, and 26 gigahertz make available as early as possible.
And Tim, if I may add something just from a mere regulatory point of view, there are open deadlines to be met, and I would remind you that for the 700 megahertz, it's by the end of June. So, and as far as I know, those deadline still stands.
I was literally about to ask you that question, whether you're aware of any changes to that. Okay. We had another question regarding the ecosystem from Lars Weberstall. I hope I pronounced that okay, from Encom, who's asked, how will the pandemic affect the ecosystem manufacturing with respect to time to market and price levels? Obviously, the obvious person I'm turning to here is Luigi, but if anyone else has got anything they want to add, then do so.
Well, I mean, it is quite I would say difficult to answer this question because we are still shipping our chipset to our customers, and so for what we are concerned at the moment, we didn't have any problems in doing that. I want to highlight that, like our CEO said, we are one of the few companies in the world which are able to put devices into the market from remote. This is a unique capability of Qualcomm. We have always been the company structured that way. So I don't know if I answered the question coming from the audience, but this is as we approach it.
Yeah, it certainly feels like you're coping with the issues it raises quite well. The other question that we have.
Sorry, Tim. Just come back on that point. I think it comes also to your discussion about the value of spectrum. If there is a very bad recession, and this reflects, go back to the financial crisis, actually the price point of devices is going to become a very relevant factor for a large number of people, and delaying device change is something that we see quite commonly when we have a financial crisis or some financial impact in the market. So there is a very relevant thing to bear in mind, that whilst we might be merrily rolling out network, and during the last crisis we did actually deploy a lot of fiber in preparation for the eventual upturn in economic activity, actually consumers' purchases of devices will be affected by whatever happens to the economy. That will affect two things. Firstly, if the price point for 5G devices is not there at the price point they're willing to pay, that will delay things. And people may well just delay their device changing decisions until they have more certainty about their future economic well-being. So we have to bear in mind that there is only so much to meet these political objectives that networks can do. At the end of the day, if we don't have strong economies, it's about what consumers choose to do.
That is a very good point, because obviously one of the benefits of 5G to networks is not necessarily about providing amazing. Obviously, it does provide amazing capabilities to the people who have 5G, but also it frees up your LTE networks, because a lot of the high usage customers move off LTE onto 5G, and that's not going to happen if people don't have the 5G phones. That's a very good point. We have another question. I mentioned in my introduction about societal benefits to spectrum, and how it is helping to kind of reduce digital divide and so on. Rob Yates from LYA asks about what is the economic rationale for delaying spectrum awards. We've talked a bit about logistics and how it may be difficult to actually run the awards kind of properly. And my feeling is, given these logistical problems and also the uncertainty over what's going to happen going forward with network rollout and so on, that anything run at the moment is going to be relatively inefficient from an economic point of view. But he specifically asks, is there kind of an economic rationale for delaying the awards? Does anyone have anything to add on that?
Well, I think there is. Sorry.
There is an economic rationale for delaying the awards, right? I mean, And actually, there are economic reasons why these awards should not be delayed. As I said during the speech, if we look at what is happening globally, outside of Europe, Europe has a big risk and in delaying the awards, and we can actually suffer from that, in the next 10 years after the crisis is gone.
And Nick, I think you were going to add something to it as well.
I mean, if you want to be pedantically economic about it, if you have a lot of uncertainty about future value, then common value uncertainty leads to inefficient outcomes in auctions, or can lead to inefficient outcomes in auctions. But as I say, in my mind, the sort of practical challenges probably dominate over the economic arguments. If the spectrum's not there, why take the risk? You're not, it's 6 months delay, probably tops. Personally, I just wouldn't want to put my own life at risk for some arbitrary objective that was written way before the crisis.
Thanks, Nick. Well, you won't be pleased to know that the audience does not agree with you. The result of the first poll, as it stands at the moment, says
I'm expendable. Is that what you're saying?
The question is: should all spectrum auctions and awards scheduled for 2020 be delayed till 2021? Now, the word "all" is doing a lot of carrying there, but 68% of people do not think that all spectrum awards should be delayed. So there's a smile on Louise's face, I can see, but unfortunately, it does sound like you're expendable, Nick. The other question that we asked in the poll was what impact people think the current crisis is going to have on spectrum value. I set out kind of my initial thoughts at the beginning, and there is really no clear winner here. We've basically got 26% of people think the value will fall, 20% think some will fall and some will rise, and 26% of people think there will be no impact. The only one that has anything different from the 26% is that 22% think it will rise. So there's 22% of people who think that the increased value of telecoms is going to be carrying willingness to pay, whereas everyone else thinks that it's going to be either some fall or no impact. I'd be interested by the panel's thoughts on this. I mean, do you have an immediate thought as to what is going to happen into the long-term value of spectrum?
But if I may start, I think you need to distinguish the societal value and just to observe that there is a big increase and for bandwidth demands. That's the reality today. So from that perspective, value has increased dramatically, and we cannot imagine such a crisis situation without broadband, without 4G services. So for the financial value, so the money that operators are ready to pay for, this might be a little different. But again, we need to distinguish the short and the long term. In the short term, you mentioned this also, Tim, in your introductory remarks. Of course, the telecom sector is not totally immune for recession, even if compared to other sector things about airlines company, the situation is far better indeed. So, but inevitably there will be some business opportunity which has been missed during the last few weeks. But when looking at the long term, I don't think that this will indicate a kind of depreciation of the value. And quite on the contrary, there will be other and new business opportunities for sure.
Thank you. Anyone else want to comment on that?
It's not our SPG's business to make our mind up on the value of spectrum. Our business is to look what spectrum do we need for the services, and I think we are convinced that 5G will change our life and our economies, our societies, and therefore we need the spectrum that needs to be made available, and we are eager to make it available as early as possible, and don't think about the value of it.
Okay, I think Luigi or Nick, you are also.
Yeah, maybe I can comment. Yeah. So our job, of course, is not to speculate on the spectrum value or the pricing, what is going to be in the future, etc. Our job is to make chipset so that all the spectrum bands will be available for 5G. That's what exactly we are doing. We are enabling all spectrum bands to be used in our chipset. That's our job. Then when we look at spectrum value, what we can say is we hope that the spectrum keep the fair value and enables the operators to keep investing and deploying for 5G. So and that remains our view. So fair value for spectrum, then it will depend on allowing operators to deploy, not to spend too much money probably, or not to overpay for it, so that they have money to pay for deployment.
And Nick, did you want to add to that?
I think there is one interesting point that comes out of it for regulators, actually, is that if the benefits are societal, let's say it's universal availability, for example, and there is some increased willingness to pay by consumers, but not to cover the entire societal benefits. And how do we capture the full societal benefits? That's the more interesting economic question for regulators and for operators, I suppose. And is there another? And historically, what we've done is use coverage obligations. We're getting to a point now where those are so large, or the cost of them are so large, you might have a negative price of spectrum. So how would you? Are there other ways that we can capture the societal benefits? I don't want to delay auctions to think about it, but for the next opportunities we have, could we deliver those societal benefits in a smarter way to try and capture them? Because I don't think you will capture them through consumer prices.
That's a very good question, and the reason that regulators haven't just moved on to something that does that is because it's very, very difficult. One of my colleagues, Tony Lavender, published a paper a few years ago looking at trying to include societal value into spectrum auctions and awards, and the conclusion of that paper was it's very difficult to do. So it's a very good question, and I think that's something that we should be considering going forwards. But short of moving to a kind of beauty contest auction hybrid, where you try and push for not just coverage obligations, but also other societal benefits, it becomes very difficult to see how to do that. But that's not to say we shouldn't try. I think we are basically at the end of the panel now. We are going to have another session in a moment where I'm going to be joined by Richard Marsden to talk about impacts on Spectrum Awards and so on, so that the audience can have their say as to what they think is going to happen. Given the results of the poll, it'd be interesting to see if we can get an argument going amongst them. But I'd like to just thank the panel that we've got here for their contributions. It's been very interesting and very good to hear from all sides. I would normally at this point ask people to show their appreciation, but we're not going to hear the clapping enough. They do it very, very loudly. So instead, I'd like to pass on my thanks and the thanks of everyone else. So, and I think I'll pass back to Dan now to finish off.
Hi, Tim. Yeah, no, thank you very much. And I'd like to echo Tim's thoughts there. A really interesting panel, and a huge thank you to Tim and to all of our panelists. So yeah, we heard a number of perspectives, I guess, both for and against Spectrum Awards being delayed. And on the valuation side, I think we discovered there seems to be some uncertainty on what the effects and the impact of the current situation may be on spectrum values. So, but a really interesting panel. So thank you to Tim, and thank you very much to all of our panelists as well. And as Tim says, now it's all of your turn to get involved. So in a second, we want to hear your comments. You want to hear from your comments and thoughts on these issues and more. And we're going to be doing that in the Have Your Say session. So those of you who were part of the event yesterday might have joined that session then. So in a second, I'd like to invite you all to head over to the sessions area, which you can navigate to on the left, the menu on the left-hand side of your screen. And when you get into that Have Your Say session, you'll have the opportunity to bring your audio and video feed live and actually become up on the screen and be part of the discussion. So we're really keen to have all of your thoughts on the issues that have been covered. So once again, I'd like to thank all of our panelists for the session we've just heard, and invite you all to join me now over in the Have Your Say room in the sessions area, and we'll get started with the audience interactive session. So I'll see you over in that session very shortly. Thank you.